What's up everybody, welcome back to our channel. Today I'm really excited to share a much requested video all about the DIY process for my built-in bookcase IKEA hack. Everyone loves a good IKEA hack, and I've truly been so excited to share this DIY IKEA Billy bookcase hack since the day I started the project. The Billy bookcases really were a perfect blank canvas to create my studio office built-in bookshelves, so I'm excited to share with you today how I did it. When we moved into this house, this room off the garage was pretty much a plain box and totally a blank canvas. This separate space was a huge selling point for us in this house because my ultimate goal has always been to have a standalone studio, creative studio, music studio, and office, and I knew that there was a ton of potential here. So after pinning a ton of photos of built-in bookshelves, I knew that they would be the perfect focal point for my office. Before we installed these, this back wall was just a blank piece of drywall. There was nothing going on, and I really felt like some color and texture would totally change the game in this space. So if you've ever looked into custom cabinetry or shelves, you know that hiring someone to create them from scratch can be outrageously expensive. So because I was already decorating out of budget, I decided to DIY my built-ins with IKEA Billy bookcases. So here's what the design process was like. While IKEA carries a lot of styles of bookshelves that would work great for a built-in hack project, I decided on the Billy for a few reasons. It just so happened that the size I chose, which was the 15 3/4 inch wide by 93 1/4 inch tall shelves, was almost exactly the perfect height for my office ceiling, which is about 8 feet high, a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on where you're standing in the room, because the floors are uneven. So if you have 8-foot ceilings, this size should be a perfect fit for you too. I also knew I wanted to put a 72-inch sofa between the shelves because a lot of the inspiration pictures I had gathered had a sofa about that size in the middle, and oddly enough, my room measurements worked out so that 2 of the 15-inch shelves would fit almost perfectly on either side of a 72-inch sofa. So even though I wish that the shelves themselves were a bit deeper, they're only about 10 inches deep, this coincidence of measurements was far too good to pass up. All my inspiration photos had another thing in common, and that was connecting shelves in the middle between the vertical shelves and above the sofa. I think something about this design element really seals the deal in terms of making shelves look truly built in. So since IKEA doesn't make any horizontal Billy products that would work to fill in the middle, we had to create that shelf from scratch. So here are the supplies you'll need to tackle a similar project. I'm putting a link in the description to the exact materials that I used. You'll need 4 of the 15-inch IKEA Billy bookcases. You'll need 3 1-inch by 12-inch by 8-foot whitewood boards for the middle shelf portion. You'll need 10 1-inch by 2-inch by 8-foot poplar boards. And you'll need 1 9/16" by 3 1/4 inch by 96-inch baseboard. You'll also need assorted wood screws, some paintable caulk, some wood filler, and very important, some shellac-based primer. It's super important to use a shellac-based primer because of the finish on the IKEA Billy bookcases. It's kind of a stubborn material, and you need something shellac-based in order to be able to paint over the finish that's already on these bookcases. Lastly, you'll need your paint. I used a color called Hidden Falls by Benjamin Moore in satin on the shelves and in matte on the wall behind. The tools you'll need for this project include a circular saw or a jigsaw, a miter saw to cut mitered edges for the baseboard if you're using it, a drill and assorted drill bits, a tape measure, a nail gun, and an electric sander and sandpaper. I'll put links to all my go-to tools in the description. Here are the steps. Step 1 is to build your Billy bookshelves according to the instructions provided by IKEA, but only adding the fixed middle shelf for now and skipping the adjustable shelves. Step 2 is decide where you ultimately want the adjustable shelves to live by playing around with different placement. The Billy is designed in such a way that doesn't allow for every cubby to be the exact same size, so determining what you want the placement to look like in advance is crucial before committing to filling in all those adjustable shelf holes. I figured out a way to place them so that the shelves that were second from the top and the shelves that were second from the bottom were the same size, and then the rest were all squares, so that worked out well for me. Step 3 is to line your bookcases up and make sure they fit correctly. So my office has very uneven floors. Thank you, very old bungalow houses, and it turned out that the floors on the right side of the bookshelf wall were a lot higher than on the left, meaning we had to actually cut down the top shelf extenders for the two right Billies a little bit in order for them to fit. So now's a good time to line your bookcases up and make sure they fit correctly where they're gonna go. Step 4 is to secure your Billy bookcases to the wall, making sure to drill them into the studs at as many locations as possible. So because the back panel of Billy bookcases is not a solid wood material, it's just like a cardboard thing that you slide in, we drilled the outermost bookcases to the walls that were perpendicular to the sofa wall, so the side walls, versus drilling through the back of the bookcases through the cardboard stuff, because it felt like drilling through the actual wood part of the bookcases would secure them much better to the walls. We then drilled the inner bookcases to the outer bookcases, so everything was attached. Step 5 applies if you're adding the middle shelf portion like I did. So in step 5 at this point, you want to measure out the length between the two pairs of Billy shelves and cut 2 of the 1 by 12 by 8 foot whitewood boards to that length using a circular saw, miter saw, or jigsaw. I wanted this middle shelf portion to be flush with the Billies in front, so we also cut them down a bit lengthwise so that they would line up with the front edge of the Billies and look seamless. I also wanted the middle shelf portion to be the same height as my top Billy shelves, so I determined what height my vertical cubby panels would need to be in order to place the top and bottom panels in line with the top Billy shelf, and I cut 4 whitewood board panels to that size at this step. Step 5B here would be to assemble this middle shelf portion as its own entity. So because the 72-inch space between my Billy bookshelf pairs wouldn't allow for equally sized cubbies that matched the top cubby of my Billies, I decided to create 2 matching sized cubbies on the ends of my middle shelf and leave a larger cubby in the middle for a nice symmetrical look. After deciding on your cubby size and placement, then drill your vertical panels in place between the 2 horizontal whitewood boards. Step 6 is to attach your middle shelf portion to the Billies. This is definitely a job for at least 2 people. I was very lucky to have my dad and my husband help me out with this part because it was also really heavy. And here you essentially want to drill the upper horizontal panel into the ceiling studs in several places. There was no easy way to secure the middle shelf portion to the Billies themselves, so we simply made sure that we secured it to as many ceiling studs as possible in several places. Step 7 is to add your poplar boards. So in order to address the small tiny gaps between the outermost Billies and the adjacent walls, plus the small gap that's in between the top of the Billies and the ceiling, and to create a smooth line across the top and further blend the Billies with the middle shelf portion, we used the 1 inch by 2 inch by 8 foot poplar boards to give a uniform look. We also ran them vertically between the pairs of Billy bookcases to cover up the tiny seam between them, make them look more built in, and that 2-inch thickness of the poplar board covers this seam perfectly. We also added a poplar board to the bottom of the middle shelf portion to give it a uniform look. To further the uniform look, we ran the poplar boards on the outer edges of the Billy pairs as well. It's worth noting here that we didn't run poplar board vertically over the interior vertical panels of the middle shelf portion because the existing thickness of that whitewood that we built the middle portion out of already matched the thickness of the horizontal shelves on the Billies. So it felt like the right move to leave them the way they were here. So at this point, decide where you're going to put your poplar boards, use a saw to cut the boards to the necessary sizes, and then use a nail gun to secure the boards in place. Step 8 is to connect the bottoms of the Billy shelves. So I had to get a bit creative here to get the look I was going for on the bottom, and I ended up attaching a poplar board just below the bottom shelf on each Billy pair, and then layering baseboard over top to finish out the bottom. Step 9 is to fill in all the adjustable shelf holes, any screw holes from drilling, and nail gun holes with wood filler. This is kind of a pain, but in my opinion, it's one of the things that makes this project look truly built in. So fill in all the holes, let the wood filler dry according to the product instructions, and then sand it for a smooth finish. I'm here in the studio in a ski mask, and the reason is because I don't have any safety goggles to use right now while I'm sanding. I filled in all the holes for these IKEA bookcases with wood filler or putty or whatever, and now I have to sand it down, and so yeah, this is not ideal because this is sort of like a sunglass vibe, but we're gonna make it work. Step 10 is to sand, 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 sand everything. Do not skip this step. I can't emphasize this enough. It's a huge pain and it takes forever to sand each cubby and each side of everything, even that back part of the Billies that's sort of the flimsy cardboard. Sand everything. I promise it's one of the most important steps to make sure that the primer will bond with the Billy bookcases. I linked the sander that I used in the description. It was a light and easy one for me to maneuver. I'm not a super strong person, so I needed something that I could really get into the corners. And I would also recommend at this step wearing some face protection, some goggles, a mask to avoid getting dust in your eyes and mouth because it can get a little messy. So I got a smaller sander. And I got some legit goggles, so I'm not wearing the ski goggles, but I feel like this is wildly uncomfortable. And I'm here to tell you that this feels like it was made for a child. So after sanding the whole setup, you want to wipe down all the surfaces with a damp cloth, followed by a dry cloth to make sure all the sand particles are gone. Step 11 is to caulk any gaps or cracks with paintable caulk. I went kind of crazy and caulked like just about everything I could possibly find to make the shelves look as custom as possible. Plus, I have to admit, something about caulking cracks is surprisingly satisfying and anxiety-soothing for me. Step 12 is to prime your shelves with the Shellac-Based Primer. It's one of the DIYs I took inspiration from for this project. Stressed the importance of Shellac-Based Primer over and over again, and I'm really glad that they did. The finish that IKEA uses on these Billy bookcases is very difficult to paint if you don't sand and prime with a Shellac-Based primer. So I did 3 coats of primer, and of course, allowed required drying time indicated on the product label in between the coats in order to ensure that my paint job would have the best chance of staying power. Another tip here, if you have windows in the room, definitely open them while you prime, and definitely wear a mask while you're priming as well, because it's pretty heavy duty stuff with a very strong chemical smell. So would highly recommend opening doors, opening windows, and trying to get the airflow through. You don't want to be breathing in this stuff more than you need to. Step 13 is to paint. So I decided to paint the wall behind my shelves first with a matte finish paint, and then I used the satin finish to paint the Billies and the middle shelf portion. I ultimately ended up doing 2 full coats of paint on both the wall and the shelves, with touch-ups after the fact in any spots that needed it. The biggest thing I want to stress here is that you have to make sure you wait the recommended amount of time between paint coats so as to allow them to properly dry. I'm a very impatient person. I didn't want to do this, but I would highly recommend waiting as much time as the label indicates that you should between paint coats, because it's worth it. The brand of paint that I used is Benjamin Moore, and after my final coat of paint, I waited a full 7 days before putting anything on my shelves. To be honest though, I would strongly recommend waiting a little bit longer if you can. It's inevitable that a DIY project like this is going to need touch-ups now and then, but one thing that has helped a lot for me is putting felt feet or felt squares underneath items on my shelves to avoid anything sticking to the paint and peeling it off. I will say that before I discovered the felt feet solution, a few things did stick here and there and pull a little bit of paint off, but it really was pretty minimal. So I will say that I've been pretty happy with this Benjamin Moore paint that I used. I think it's a good paint to use for a bookshelf project like this, but my biggest piece of advice would be to exercise patience and wait as long as you possibly can before putting stuff on these shelves. So once you've waited at least 7 to 14 days, you can start adding all your pretty stuff onto the shelves and style it out. So at this point, I slid my 72-inch sofa into place. I'll link the exact sofa that I bought for this project in the description, slid that between the shelves, and then I chose to add one large piece of art, which was a cool vintage lithograph of a French gallery show ad that I found on Etsy, in the center of the wall between the shelves, plus 2 little sconces from Jonathan Adler that I absolutely love on either side. I also changed out the boring flush mount boob light that was in the center of the room with a really cool mid-century one that I'll also link in the description, and I really love how it finishes out the room. Overall, this project is definitely a commitment. It takes a little bit more time than a weekend, but it is truly my favorite project I've ever done. It's so worth it, and it has completely transformed the space. I absolutely love working in here now. We film our podcast in here. I have songwriting sessions in here. I film all kinds of creative videos in here, and it has completely transformed the space from kind of just a boring white box into something that really feels like it has a ton of depth and history, and the shelves do look like they've been here for a while, which was exactly my goal. I absolutely love changing out the decor on the shelves and filling it with all kinds of cool finds from the flea market and prints from artists that I love, photos, all kinds of things like that. So it has truly been a total game changer in this space. So I'm curious to hear if you've ever created a fake built-in bookshelf or some sort of project like this from a standalone bookcase. Let me know in the comments what IKEA hack I should try next or what DIY I should try next, and let me know if you make something similar. We love, love, love seeing projects from our community. It's the coolest thing ever. So be sure to subscribe for more fun projects and lifestyle videos soon, and we'll see you guys in the next video.